The mind is the most powerful part of the human body. It is incredibly important for our human function. So now I'm going to show you how to make one. I began by making a head cast. This one was of my friend that I was using as a model. After rubbing Vaseline on top of the head cast, I began warming up my sculpting clay using a hairdryer. Using the heated clay, I then smoothed it over the head cast and began moulding my rough shape of a brain. It can be as messy as you like to begin with because you add the finer details later on. For a realistic and smooth appearance, I thinned some of the edges using my steel scraper. I gently used my fingers to blend the edges down so that it was as thin as possible. Once it's nice and smooth, I was ready to move on to the next step. I used a finer tool to create an outline for where the brain would be seeping from, and then I scraped it out to create more depth and texture. Here you can see I'm applying more detail. I used my finer tool to create some ripped skin effect around the brain. I scratched on the surface using an eye tool to create detail onto the brain. As you can see, it's very rough and bumpy, and there is a lot of fixing to do at this point. I made layers to represent the wound, the skull and the brain. I used a powder brush to remove any excess sculpting clay. This helps prevent random detail being added into the mould. I used my fingers to smooth over any harsh edges that were on the brain. Using the eyebrow brush, I created some skin texture so that it wasn't so smooth around the edge. Next, I prepared for the mould making by placing the head cast into a bowl. I improvised creating an excess tray using plastic and sculpting clay to hold it into position. So here you can see it's all ready now, and I've got my Dragonskin silicone ready to start mixing up. Using a brighter light, I noticed that I wanted to add a few more details into the brain before adding the silicone and creating the mould. I sprayed release spray before mixing up the silicone. Next, I used scales in a mixing bowl to measure even parts of the silicone. You can actually use a teaspoon of the silicone from about 30 centimetres above your sculpt to drip across the finer details to encapsulate them into the mould. I actually missed this step. This doesn't matter as the silicone will still encapsulate most of the detail that I created. I wanted the brain mould to be strong, therefore I made a few layers to ensure that it was not going to break easily. I used 20 grams of part A and part B for each layer and made sure it was dry in between. As you can see, there was a lot of silicone dripping over the edge, and I kept pouring that back on top to make sure that it would be over the brain, not just around the edge. This is my final layer, and I wait for it to dry before I then start to powder. It's very important to wait until the mould is completely dry before trying to remove it. I dusted the top using translucent powder. This prevents the prosthetic from sticking to itself. This is definitely the most satisfying part about creating a prosthetic. I continuously use the powder to help remove the mould from the sculpt. Finally, the mould of the brain is made, and I use a fine tool to remove excess clay. I decided to use gelatin because it's a cheaper alternative, and I coloured it using flocking, which is tiny fibres of different colours for a realistic skin effect. For my blending edge for the prosthetic, I used super baldiez thinned down with IPA. I used a paintbrush to apply 3 to 4 thin layers and let them dry each in between. After, I heated my gelatin in 30-second bursts in the microwave until it was all completely melted, and I added the flocking. I used a slushing technique to evenly spread the gelatin throughout the mould. Last but not least, I dusted translucent powder inside to prevent the prosthetic from sticking to itself. Yay, finally it's all complete. Now all the brain needs is some colour and some fake blood to bring it to life. Stay tuned to see the final result of the brain coloured and ready for application. If you enjoyed watching this clip on how to make a brain, please like, subscribe and comment. Thank you!